Charlemagne's many wives and concubines. Thank you to Opera Desktop Browser for sponsoring this video. Charlemagne is a central figure in European history. In the 700s, he conquered a vast empire. He is considered the progenitor of the French monarchy, several German dynasties, and he even forced the Pope to crown him the first Holy Roman Emperor. But while he was busy converting pagans to Christianity at sword point, his love life was far from holy. The great emperor had 4 or 5 wives. The relationship status of one has long been debated, for a very cruel reason, and at least 4 concubines. Many of his romantic entanglements were going on simultaneously, and the influence these women had on imperial politics shocked clerics of the day. In total, they presented the emperor with 18 children, and so many heirs planted the seeds for the destruction of the Carolingian Empire. Today, let's meet Emperor Charlemagne's many wives and concubines. A note on the term concubine. It refers to a woman in a long-term, non-marital relationship with a man. While the word may have a derogatory connotation today, it did not in the 9th century. Many women had the Latin word concubina proudly inscribed on their tombs. Other words we might use today, like lover, mistress, or partner, don't quite fit the bill. So in an effort to pay respect to people of the past, I will refer to these women as they would have referred to themselves. In the early 700s, Charles Martel was the power behind the King of the Franks. Charles added to his boss's already vast territory by conquering Germanic people to the east. Then he pushed the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate out of Aquitaine and brought it under his control as well. His son and successor, Pippin the Short, decided he was done pulling the strings of a puppet king. He deposed King Childeric III, locked him up in a monastery, and had his long hair, a mystical symbol of kingship, cut off. The Pope offered to legitimize Pippin's rule in exchange for defense against the Lombards. Pippin conquered them and secured a large swathe of central Italy for the Pope to govern, called the Papal States. Pippin married Fastrada of Laon, and they had 8 children, though only 2 sons and a daughter survived. When the king died in 768, his land was divided between his 2 sons, in accordance with Frankish inheritance law. The younger brother, Carloman, got the eastern half of the empire, and older brother, Charles, got the west. He would become known as Charles the Great, or Charlemagne. 20-year-old Charlemagne was powerfully built, and at 6 feet, exceptionally tall for his era. He wore his hair cropped short in defiance of the earlier fashion for long, mystical locks, but he sported a luxurious mustache. His large, lively eyes hinted at a cunning, calculating mind. Any king was bound to attract attention from the fairer sex, but the handsome and charismatic Charlemagne was rarely lonely. Himiltrude was the king's first recorded romantic partner. She was a Frankish noblewoman, possibly the granddaughter of the Count of Paris. Little of her life was recorded aside from her illustrious relationship, and exactly what that relationship was has long been debated. Some historians regard her as Charlemagne's first wife, others as a concubine. Sources record that both Charlemagne and his brother Carloman were ordered by their father to marry 2 beautiful Frankish women, Himiltrude and Gerberga. However, there have been many doubts cast upon the legality of their marriage. One theory postulates that Germanic people had a more flexible concept of marriage, called Fridelia. The couple were together when Charlemagne ascended the throne, and it would have been customary for her to be recorded as his queen, but she was not. One reason their marriage might have been covered up is that Himiltrude gave birth to a son, Pippin, who was born with a curving of the spine called kyphosis. This is more colloquially referred to as a hunchback, and indeed the boy came to be known as Pippin the Hunchback. Medieval people believed that physical disability was an outward manifestation of spiritual corruption, and the great champion of Christianity in Europe certainly could not see any impurity in himself. He came to resent Himiltrude for their son's disability and abandoned her to a convent. There is certainly an argument to be made that he had indeed been married to her, but later denied it in order to clear his bed for a new bride and the succession for a different heir. Pippin was, at least, allowed to continue to live at his father's court. A grave excavated in the monastery of Nivelles is believed to contain Himiltrude's remains. The skeleton indicates that she lived to about the age of 40. A key to Charlemagne's success was his embrace of new ideas and more efficient ways of doing things. The Carolingian Renaissance ushered in reforms of administration, law, education, and the military, which shaped Europe for centuries. Like Charlemagne, I'm always looking for new ways to improve my work and life. That's why I love Opera Desktop Browser. It helps me streamline my workflow so I can get more done with less stress. When I'm researching my next video, I'm often slowed down by the endless research tabs I have open. Opera has tab islands, which are organized by topic and can be collapsed, expanded, and rearranged. I can also create multiple workspaces for business and personal. The built-in free VPN and ad blocker help me feel secure when I'm working in a coffee shop or another region. With Aria, I can use the power of AI to help answer questions, identify pictures, and generate images. Opera has tons of other smart features that make browsing easier, like detaching videos and moving them anywhere on the screen, and the sidebar that lets me access my social media and music easily. Try Opera web browser today by clicking the link in the description. And now, back to history. Unsatisfied with the vast empire he had inherited, Charlemagne was keen to lead his armies towards expansion. But there was one, slightly less bloody, alternative to warfare: marriage. He contracted a political union with Desiderata of the Lombards. She was the daughter of Desiderius, king of the Lombards, a Germanic people who had control of much of Italy. The alliance increased Charlemagne's influence on the important peninsula, and it isolated his brother Carloman. The siblings did not get along, but it put him in conflict with Pope Stephen III. The pontiff urged the king not to set his previous wife aside, giving fuel to the argument that Charlemagne and Himiltrude were legally married. But Stephen was motivated to come up with any argument to prevent the marriage with his Italian rival. So the Charlemagne and Himiltrude did-they-didn't they debate rages on. Though that is all I have to report on the subject, so let's move on. Desiderata was 16 when she arrived in Aachen and received the homage of the Frankish nobles. She and her new mother-in-law, Fastrada, got on incredibly well. Charlemagne had an excellent relationship with his mother, and he usually respected her advice. Despite the Dowager Queen's good opinion of his new wife, after less than a year with Desiderata, Charlemagne dumped her. It is not clear if he found her unattractive in some way once he met her, or because their marriage was no longer politically effective. Whatever the reason, it was the only time recorded that Charlemagne and his mother quarreled. The king dissolved their union on the grounds of non-consummation, which may have been true, as Desiderata didn't bear any children. The pope was all too happy to annul the marriage he had argued against, and Desiderata was sent back to her family in Italy. She moved to a convent and died 5 years later at the age of 22. Hildegard of the Vinschau wed Charlemagne on the 30th of April, 771. She was the scion of an important Frankish noble family with vast possessions in Carloman's territory. So yet another way for Charlemagne to stick it to his brother. By this time, the siblings were on the brink of out-and-out war. Their mother, Queen Bertrada, was desperately trying to keep the peace. But the conflict was quickly solved by Carloman's sudden death at the age of 20. Convenient as it was, foul play was not suspected. Carloman died of a severe nosebleed. He had a wife, Gerberga, and 2 sons. The eldest was named Pippin. Queen Gerberga expected the toddler to be named king and she his regent. But Charlemagne had allied himself with the most powerful family in his dead brother's kingdom, and they helped him seize East Francia. Gerberga ran with her sons straight into the arms of King Desiderius of the Lombards, who was quite salty with Charlemagne for dumping his daughter. Together they went to Pope Hadrian I and asked him to crown little Pippin as king. Charlemagne cut through all the inheritance red tape with his sword. He invaded Italy and defeated Desiderius. He had his ex-father-in-law tonsured, meaning he was subjected to the humiliation of having his head shaved and then forced to become a monk. It is not known what became of Gerberga or her 2 sons. They too may have been forced into a religious life, or they might have been executed. Now that Charlemagne had reunited his father's vast empire, he needed an heir of his own. Hildegard gave birth to a healthy son, Charles, within a year of the wedding. She had 8 pregnancies over 12 years, including a set of twins. The queen accompanied her husband on many military campaigns. She delivered her second child, Adelaide, during the siege of Pavia, but the baby died on the treacherous journey back to France. After the births of Himiltrude and Carloman, Hildegard accompanied her husband to Aquitaine, where she gave birth to twins, Louis and Lothair. Louis survived, but Lothair died in infancy. Hildegard ruled the court and served as her husband's regent while he was away on campaign. She was well aware of the political goings-on of the empire and had a significant influence upon them. She was the only one of Charlemagne's wives to convince him to grant her own kin land, money, and political offices. The couple also had their devout faith in common. Hildegard commissioned scribes to illuminate fabulous religious texts, and she was patroness of several convents and monasteries. After 2 wives had failed to capture or keep the king's affection, and in a time when polygamy was commonplace, Hildegard managed to hold Charlemagne's loyalty for the rest of her life. The king's parents had instilled in him the importance of learning, and he was determined that both his sons and daughters be well educated. It was quite unusual for women of the time to be tutored. Hildegard was particularly interested in their religious upbringing. The queen used education to mold her offspring into the ideal Christian family, while the king used his armies to mold Europe into a Christian continent. He saw it as his duty to save the souls of the many pagans surrounding his empire, even if he had to end their lives to do it. He launched a raid against the Saxons and cut down their sacred tree, Irminsul. 3 decades of war and forced conversion followed. The conflict was finally cut short when Charlemagne executed 4,000 Saxons, forcing their leaders to submit and be baptized. Charlemagne continued to add to his father's territory. The Carolingian Empire eventually stretched over 1 million square kilometers, with a population of between 10 and 20 million people. A rider on horseback would take 30 days to cover the 12,000 miles between Schleswig in the north and Barcelona in the south. In order to maintain control over this vast dominion, Charlemagne devised a complex system of administration. The empire was divided into counties, each governed by a count, who would maintain Charlemagne's laws and report back to him. Bishops were also in place to maintain religious order, which was vital to maintaining feudal control. The Addominito General was a sweeping edict which standardized church practices and the everyday behavior of common people, making it clear that there was only one correct way to be a Christian. The imperial court never had a fixed capital, but would move around the empire. However, Charlemagne's favorite residence was his grand palace at Aachen in modern-day Germany. Charlemagne standardized coinage, weights, measures, and laws, revived learning, founded schools, increased literacy, and drew great thinkers and artists to his court. A new writing system called Carolingian minuscule homogenized letter forms and introduced lowercase letters and the question mark. In the spring of 781, Charlemagne, Hildegard, and 4 of their children traveled to Rome to meet Pope Adrian. The pontiff baptized the children. 4th son, Carloman, was renamed Pippin. It was Frankish tradition that a lord's heir be named after his father, so this was a clear move to disinherit his disabled eldest son. He was 11 at the time and was well aware of his diminished standing in the family. Unsurprisingly, he grew up with a large chip on his shoulder. The newly rechristened Pippin and his brother Louis were also anointed and crowned as sub-kings within their father's empire. Pippin became king of the Lombards and Louis king of Aquitaine. The young monarchs were each sent to reside in their respective kingdoms under the care of regents. The queen brought a few souvenirs back from Rome, the holy relics or bones of martyrs Saint Gordianus and Saint Epimachus. She deposited them at the monastery of Kempten. The town of Kempten, Germany grew up around the religious order, and Queen Hildegard has long been an important figure there. Fountains and statues of her have been lost, but there is still an Hildegard Square, and until the 1950s, many girls born in the town were named Hildegard. On April 30th, 783, her 12th wedding anniversary, Queen Hildegard gave birth to her 9th child, but she suffered complications and died during the delivery. She was 29. Her baby, who was named Hildegard in her honor, lived for 40 days, but was buried with her mother. Charlemagne commissioned epitaphs to his wife and daughter, and arranged for daily masses to be sung and candles lit at their tomb to accompany their souls to heaven. The grave became a popular destination for pilgrims, and over the centuries, numerous miracles were reported there. Queen Hildegard is venerated by the Catholic Church on April 30th, the anniversary of her marriage and death. 2 months later, Charlemagne's mother, Fastrada, died. Heartbroken as he might have been, within a few months he moved on to lady number 4. Fastrada was an 18-year-old bride when she wed the 35-year-old king in October 783. She was the daughter of a powerful East Frankish count, and their union strengthened the front against the Saxons, with whom Charlemagne was still at war. Fastrada gave birth to 2 daughters, Theodrada and Himiltrude. When Charlemagne finally defeated the Saxons, he took his wife on a triumphant tour of his new conquest. On the journey, they rejoiced and were happy in each other's company. Though she may not have equaled his beloved Hildegard, the new queen did manage to hold the king's attention and play an active role in politics. He even minted coins with her likeness. While they were apart, the king wrote his wife affectionate platitudes, inquiring about her health and that of their children. Like any other soldier, he longed for warm correspondence from home. He once complained that Fastrada was not writing him often enough. But she was pretty busy. In addition to being regent, she oversaw the upbringing of her 7 stepchildren. She seems to have had an antagonistic relationship with the eldest, Pippin. Accounts written after her death claim that Queen Fastrada committed some acts of cruelty and/or convinced the king to savagely depart from his kind, gentle ways. Though there are no specifics on her dastardly deeds, and given Charlemagne's strong personality, it seems unlikely that anyone, no matter how beautiful, could charm him into something he didn't want to do. Whether Fastrada was a fairy tale villain or a scapegoat, she has been blamed for what happened next. The long-maligned Prince Pippin the Hunchback, now 24, and his followers hatched a plot to overthrow the king. When Charlemagne was on his way to battle, Pippin faked an illness and remained home. The conspirators then laid a fatal trap to assassinate the king, but their plot was uncovered, and Charlemagne was furious. He had his son's friends executed. However, he dithered on what to do about his rebellious offspring. He had never favored the young man, but he did bear him some love. It is said that Fastrada insisted that her husband tonsure his son, thereby permanently removing him from the succession. He was banished to a distant monastery, where he lived out the rest of his life. He died in 811 at the age of 42 during a plague epidemic. After Christmas 793, Charlemagne and Fastrada went to Frankfurt for a synod or an assembly of the clergy. There the queen fell suddenly ill and died at the age of 28. No cause of death is given, nor foul play suggested. Because of her bad reputation, she was denied burial at the Basilica Saint-Denis. She was instead laid to rest at St. Alban's Abbey, Mainz, near Queen Hildegard. Charlemagne ordered a tomb of white marble with golden statues, and he had her silver spindle hung over the altar. Legend says that Charlemagne gave Fastrada an enchanted ring, which bound them together, so much so that he could not bear to be parted with her corpse, even when it started to reek from decomposition. Eventually, the archbishop pried the ring off the queen's skeletal finger and threw it in a lake. Only then did the king permit her to be buried. Magic ring or no, he deeply mourned the death of his companion of 11 years and refused to return to the city of her death. But Charlemagne did not like to be alone, so in a few months he was on to lady number 5. Luitgard was the daughter of a German count. She was 18 and he was 46. The king found her to be a calm and virtuous woman. She was interested in education and conversed with the learned men of the court. One courtier recorded, "She is full of compliance for the king, pious, blameless, and worthy of all the love of such a husband." Whether this was her true personality or a survival method for getting along with the most powerful monarch in Europe, we may never know. Luitgard accompanied him each year on the Great Hunt, a court tradition which became all the more important as he was no longer able to personally lead his army. Luitgard cared for his 8 remaining children, but she had none of her own. This is not to assume that she was merely a companion to an aging king. Charlemagne was still quite virile and fathered more children after her death. In 800, while the couple were traveling through their empire, Luitgard died of an unknown illness. She was 24. 6 months later, Charlemagne made his most historic trip to Rome. The new pope, Leo III, had turned to him for aid after his enemies tried to gouge his eyes out. The king chased the pope's foes away, and in gratitude, Leo invited him to Rome. While celebrating Mass at St. Peter's Basilica on Christmas Day, the pope crowned Charlemagne Imperator Romanorum, Emperor of the Romans. Thus he became the first Holy Roman Emperor. Charlemagne bashfully maintained that the pope had surprised him with this unexpected gift, but the title was almost certainly agreed upon beforehand and exactly what Charlemagne wanted. In the famous painting, The Coronation of Charlemagne, created in 1861 by Friedrich Kaulbach, a prominent woman wearing a crown can be seen standing beside the emperor, watching enraptured as the event unfolds. However, as Luitgard was already cold in her tomb, and Charlemagne had no consort at the time, the queen in the painting is a figment of the artist's imagination. Charlemagne's domain was seen as a continuation of the ancient Roman Empire, but there was one big problem. The Eastern Roman Empire saw their ruler in Constantinople as the rightful emperor of the Romans. However, this throne was currently being occupied by a woman, Empress Irene, so the Pope considered it vacant and eligible to be given away. Irene and her subjects were understandably miffed. Charlemagne, now single, had solved many other sticky political problems through wedlock, so he proposed to Irene. But she shot him down and cancelled a previous engagement between their children, Himiltrude and Constantine VI. For centuries to come, Western Europeans would call Charlemagne and his successors the emperors of the Romans, and the Eastern Roman Empire the Empire of the Greeks. Renaissance Italians actually coined the term Byzantine Empire to distinguish and diminish the Eastern Roman Empire from the ancient Roman Empire of which they felt they were the rightful successors. After divorcing or burying 4 to 5 wives, Charlemagne had had his fill of matrimony, but not of sex. From the age of 52 until his death at 66, the king had at least 4 concubines, who gave him 6 more children. Gersunda delivered a daughter, Adaltrude. Madelgard gave birth to a daughter, Ruded. Regina had 2 sons, Drogo and Hugh, and Ethelind delivered 2 sons, Rickbald and Theodoric. Unfortunately, we know very little about these women. Gersunda was a Saxon, the people Charlemagne had spent 30 years converting at sword point. And we know that Charlemagne took as a concubine the sister of one of his enemies, the Danish king Gudfrid, but her name was not recorded. So it seems the king was still filling his bed by prioritizing politics. These women may have been his enemies, but they were not captured or enslaved. They had as much freedom of choice as any 9th century noblewoman, which is to say, almost none. It seems the king was also done with serial monogamy. Some of these relationships were going on simultaneously. Clerics were appalled by the king's undiminished extramarital sexual energy. One tried to dissuade him by recounting a vision of Charlemagne burning in hell for his lustful sins. It seems the clerics were jealous of the influence being wielded by the women close to the emperor. Charlemagne's daughters, too, maintained powerful positions at court. They didn't have anywhere else to go, as their father refused to allow them to marry. One might hope he didn't want to part with his beloved daughters, or see them suffer in childbirth as their mothers had. But more likely he didn't want any son-in-laws whom he would have to elevate or listen to. The emperor refused to listen to court gossip about his daughters' wild behavior, and he tolerated their common-law husbands. He even adored his illegitimate grandchildren. The circumstances of their birth meant that they would not pose a threat to his own heirs. The downside of siring so many children was that, according to Frankish inheritance law, the vast empire Charlemagne had dedicated his life to building was destined to be sliced up by his surviving legitimate sons. Unluckily, or luckily, depending on how you look at it, only one of his heirs was still alive, Louis. In 814, after a hunting trip, Charlemagne took to his bed with a lung infection. He was deeply depressed as he felt his work conquering and converting Europe was not complete. He died at the age of 66. Louis the Pious promptly banished his sisters and possibly his father's concubines to a convent. But he also made the mistake of fathering too many children. Upon his own death in 840, the Carolingian Empire was split 3 ways between his sons. Lothair became king of Middle Francia and pressured the Pope to crown him Holy Roman Emperor. Louis the German became king of East Francia and was a progenitor of many German dynasties. And Charles the Bald got West Francia, the monarchy which would eventually become France. Though Charlemagne's empire did not long outlive him, his incredible impact on law, culture, and religion, and his foundation of multiple states, has led him to be called the Father of Europe. His prodigious reproduction means that he is the father of Europe in a more literal sense as well. Charlemagne is believed to be an ancestor of every single person of European descent alive today. And that means his wives and concubines should also be counted as the mothers of Europe. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast. You can now follow History Tea Time on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.